Welcome. I am Christina Veselak, Director of Eating Protein Saves Lives, and I would like to welcome you to the first of a three-part series, Addiction Prevention and Stress Resiliency Training for Families, giving your children the nutritional, emotional, social, and spiritual tools to successfully navigate life's challenges. I'm so glad you're with us. So, Eating Protein Saves Lives is a nonprofit organization I founded several years ago to teach nutritional strategies to people in recovery and their families to support a radiant recovery journey, to give the brain the nutrients it requires to function optimally, to repair itself, and to support our recovery journeys. I am Christina Veselak, and I have been a licensed psychotherapist working in the addiction field and the mental health field for over 40 years. I've worked with innumerable families and individuals, all of whom were seeking to provide a better life for themselves and for their families. And this series comes out of that experience. And I actually decided to create this three-part series after a conversation I had with a student of mine named Lacey. She had three children, all under the age of 5, and she lived in a rural community that addiction had just decimated. And she saw addiction as this big monster that was going to eat up her children when they got old enough that she was completely powerless over. But after training with me and learning more about addiction and how to support the brain in both preventing as well as recovering from addictive and other mental health disorders, she felt empowered. She felt like she had the tools to protect her children from this monster and to prepare them to cope with the stresses of life effectively. During our conversation about this, her 5-year-old actually interrupted us and said, "Mommy, I'm hungry. Could I please have some cheese and apple?" So she had already taught her children how to notice the symptoms of hunger and possibly brain hunger as well, and what healthy foods to ask for. This is one step in building resiliency in your children. So welcome to the series. I hope you like it, and please feel free to reach out to us with questions, comments, and possibly even success stories. So the goal of this three-part series is to resource you, to resource parents, to teach our children, all of our children, the resiliency skills needed to prevent and overcome many of the challenges that children as well as adults, are susceptible to. What do you deeply desire for your child? Being in a happy, loving family, success in school, good, safe friends, for your children to have a successful transition into adulthood and be happy, effective adults? Or perhaps the stressors on your family have already been so severe that your goal is simply to help your children avoid mental health and addiction issues, and perhaps even just stay out of jail? What about these goals? Strong communication and social skills, ability to set and keep boundaries and protect themselves from abuse, the ability to appropriately ask for what they want and need, being assertive rather than trying to get their needs met by being passive and indirect or aggressive and having power over other people. Stress resilience. This might look like the ability to effectively cope and bounce back from stressful and painful situations. What about the willingness to attempt new things and learn from failure? Or a good sense of self, self-esteem perhaps, and the ability to be self-motivated, being able to be a team player, and compassion for and generosity to others. You know, I have worked in many, many addiction treatment programs, as well as other mental health programs, both for adolescents and for adults. And it turns out that all of these skills have been found to be necessary for resilience, and they're actually taught in all good treatment programs. So we want to teach our children these skills so that they don't end up in a treatment program being taught by others. So we all want these things for our children, but how do we get there? As you well know, we are now in a child and adolescent mental health crisis. In 2023, there were 2.2, more or less, million youth with a substance use disorder. 3 million youth had suicidal thoughts, and unfortunately, suicide was then and is now the second leading cause of death for teens and young adults. So we all know children and adolescents with these issues, and perhaps we had these issues ourselves growing up, and many of us feel completely powerless to do anything about it. Furthermore, many people struggle with these things on a daily basis. Depression all the way to suicide, anxiety, panic attacks, and OCD. Children who have trouble sleeping or nightmares from as young as the age of 3 and 4. Perhaps learning issues such as ADHD or school struggles or dyslexia, eating disorders, full-blown addiction, anger, defiance, bullying, self-harm behaviors, but also being shy and isolated and the victim of bullying. Experimenting with substances that could actually lead to fentanyl or drug overdose. And of course, the fentanyl overdose epidemic is growing among teenagers and young adults who do not have a substance use issue. Kids putting themselves in dangerous situations or even getting into trouble with the law. If this is your family, please know that you are not alone, but there are also answers and real help. But this isn't just about what we want for our children. This is also about what we want for ourselves as parents. How do we want to show up as parents for our children? What might being on top of our game possibly look like? Well, how about being able to help our children avoid all the above issues or effectively resolve them? Being patient and reducing our own sense of overwhelm and stress. Being able to cope with being a parent and just living life without needing mood-altering chemicals or behaviors ourselves, having and expressing inner peace, consistently using kind words and tone while still being firm and clear. What about being able to set limits and boundaries calmly, consistently, and effectively, having the ability to trust our children and therefore let go of over control and perhaps being a helicopter mom? What about having the ability to give our children room to explore their world, make mistakes without fear of judgment, and grow into their own strengths? Of course, to do that, we have to be on top of our own anxiety and our own fear. And we have to be able to trust that things will work out. And then finally, accessing outside resources and support, being free to ask for help without any shame, truly not having to do it alone. So how do we get there? Many of us struggled with many of the same things our children do and our parents did. A lot of these struggles are actually generational. And we know that generational trauma can wreck families through many, many generations. We have ourselves as parents, we have depression and anxiety, overwhelm, loneliness, and fatigue. We struggle with substances, marital or job issues, rage and violence sometimes, perhaps chronic illness, and very often shame and embarrassment. We often don't even know how to show up for ourselves, much less for our children or our partners. So, to help parents overcome their own struggles to support our children even more effectively, we want to introduce the three-legged stool concept. This is the idea that as human beings, many of our issues stem from three different categories, three different areas: biochemical imbalances in the brain and the body that impair and impact mood and behavior, psychological issues, trauma, emotional scars, lack of tools, isolation, loneliness, and then the spiritual leg, which we'll look at in a moment. What we have found is that all three need to be addressed at more or less the same time to achieve emotional and behavioral stability and addiction recovery. But we have to start with the brain, because the brain is the driver of everything. We'll look at that more closely in a minute. So this is the outline of what we will be covering in this three-part series. The first leg, bionutritional, or the brain, has to do with learning to feed our own brains optimally, providing brain-healthy food to our children until they leave home, making a family priority to teach our children how to feed their brains optimally themselves, how to notice when they have brain hunger, and then finding functional and integrative medicine resources to address imbalances as needed. So this allows medication to be a last resort rather than the only option. And at the end of this lecture, we will spend a little bit of time talking about some of these biochemical issues and medical issues that are often missed or overlooked that can possibly cause emotional and behavioral issues throughout the lifespan, perhaps may even be genetic. And integrative psychiatrists and functional nutritionists are trained to do this. The second leg is psychosocial healing. This explores emotions and connection. So our goals here are to create a safe and loving environment for children to discover and grow into their full potential, to help children be confident and creative problem solvers, to allow children to fail and be less than perfect. That's an important part of resiliency. And then to give children social skills, emotion management skills, and effective communication skills. And finally, the third leg, spiritual connection. We see this as including having meaning and purpose in life, learning to trust that life is more good than bad, and therefore being able to let go of tight control of everything and anxiety, learning to express and receive forgiveness, gratitude, and love, and being able to commune with and receive joy from beauty in its various forms, nature, loving relationships, and/or a higher power. All of these elements go into creating resiliency in our children and in ourselves as parents. So it turns out that all three legs need to be addressed at more or less the same time for healing to occur, but also to keep us stable and happy throughout our lifespan. But the brain is the driver of these issues and therefore the driver of resiliency as well. So if our brains are online and functioning well, we are more likely to be our best mind, body, and spirit. An imbalanced life requires an imbalanced brain. So whether you are a child, a teenager, or a parent, your brain is actually your best friend. And this is almost never talked about. It's our brain's job to allow us to cope with stress gracefully. But to do that, it must be fed optimally. So think about the last time you encountered a stressful situation and notice whether you were able to flow with it and access internal and external resources in order to solve the problem versus a time when you did not cope with stress gracefully and were not able to access the resources you needed. Did it have anything to do with what you fed yourself that day? Now, this is certainly not always the case. But I've found over and over and over in my practice that when we feed ourselves well, we just cope so much more effectively. What does feeding ourselves well look like? This is just a brief peek into what we call a pro-recovery diet, a healthy brain supportive diet. We want to have plenty of fruits and vegetables, maybe 2/3 the plate veggies, or half the plate veggies and fruits, 2/3 of that half vegetables of all different colors, and maybe some fruit. We don't want too much sugar. At least a quarter of the plate being high protein food. We want to be choosing complex carbohydrates and whole grains rather than ultra processed foods, which turn out to be very bad for us and our mood and behavior. Lots of good, healthy fats, butter, olive oil, coconut oil, avoiding some of the seed oils because they've been correlated with inflammation and even cancer. And then make water your drink of choice. Maybe diluted a little, flavored with a little bit of pure fruit juice for color and flavor, but mostly water. Why is this so important? Well, it's important because the brain is our master control panel. It mediates all of our feelings and all of our behavior. It allows us to learn skills and utilize them when needed, to pause, to think through an issue before we react. It gives us choice and willpower, or if it's out of balance, it removes choice and willpower from us. It allows us to have the energy and motivation to do good things in our life and for our children. And it can allow us to relax and to play and sleep. And finally, our brain mediates all of our perceptions, our interpretations, our beliefs about ourselves and the world, and our feelings. So when the brain is well fed and in balance, our feelings and perceptions or interpretations are more likely to be accurate. But when the brain is starving and out of balance, and yes, we can have starving brains, our feelings, moods, and interpretations can be all over the place. Think hangry, or maybe the last time you or someone in your family had PMS. Oops. When the brain is in balance and well fed, it can allow us to learn optimally, stay calm, respond effectively, and make good choices at all ages. Whether you're 5, 15, or 50, a well-fed and balanced brain is invaluable to us. However, when our brains are hungry or out of balance, again at 5, 15, or 50, we can all become more easily reactive. Therefore, violence, bad choices, or even compulsive or addictive behaviors can more easily occur. The brain has many functions, and they're actually mediated through a family of brain chemicals called neurotransmitters. There's 4 of them. Now, GABA and serotonin turns into melatonin, helps us be calm and relaxed and can put us to sleep. Serotonin can also give us a sense of humor. It helps us feel good about ourselves and other people. It allows us to forgive and let go of grudges and flow. And it even allows us to trust God rather than worrying so much. So even our spiritual lives do better when our brains are in balance. Then we have the catecholamines, which includes dopamine, norepinephrine, and adrenaline. I know you've all heard of adrenaline. They wake us up. They give us energy, get up and go, motivation, and drive. They give us a sense of satisfaction or reward when we complete a well-done job. And then finally, the endorphins. I think of them as our warm fuzzies or the love molecule. They can create numbness when needed, support loneliness and grief, support attachment, bring comfort from both physical and emotional pain. But all of these functions require enough brain chemicals called neurotransmitters that are actually made from the protein we eat in our diet. It's the only way they can be made in the presence of vitamins and minerals. Again, from the food we eat or the supplements we take. So why do we love our neurotransmitters? Well, all of our feelings, behaviors, and the ability to respond to stress are mediated by these neurotransmitters that are made by the food we eat. So if they're in balance and functioning properly, so probably are we. We can step up. But depleted neurotransmitters lead to symptoms throughout the lifespan. This includes ADHD, depression, apathy, fatigue, anxiety and agitation, insomnia, irritability, violence, and cravings for sugar and other substances. But what depletes these neurotransmitters? You know, we're should be born with the capacity to have well-functioning neurotransmitters, and many people are. Some people aren't, or some people end up with neurotransmitter depletion or imbalance later on in life. Why? Well, genetics can pass down in families and impair us right from the beginning. But genetics can be modified through our environment and the food we eat. So there's hope there too. Poor nutrition can deplete our neurotransmitters. Chronic stress, growing up in a very painful family, pain, illness, and of course, substance use or addictive process behaviors such as gambling or different sex addictions can severely deplete our neurotransmitters. So to keep them, to build them, rebuild them, and keep them happy, the brain actually requires certain nutrients from food to function. Now, science has been telling us this for decades, but it's never become part of the mental health or addiction treatment and recovery conversation, which is really sad. We need adequate protein to provide the amino acid precursors of neurotransmitters. And of course, they can also be bought over the counter. We need specific vitamins and minerals to act as enzymes and cofactors to turn amino acids from protein into these neurotransmitters. And we can fill in the gaps with high quality vitamin and mineral supplements. We need essential fatty acids. We need good fats. It turns out that people who struggle with suicide and even succeed in killing themselves have been shown to have very low levels in the brain and body of both cholesterol and omega-3 fatty acids. These are crucial to mental health. And then we need lots and lots of purified water. But our brain also works better when we have enough moderate exercise and sleep. So it turns out the food is not optional to our well-being. A well-fed, imbalanced brain allows us to learn and remember to use resiliency tools. So what are these resiliency skills or tools that we can use as parents and we want to teach our children? And they, of course, need well-fed brains in order to engage and utilize these skills as well. Pausing, taking deep breaths, thinking, using positive self-talk, and not catastrophizing. Calling a friend or your resiliency coach, or if you're a child, feeling safe enough to reach out to a parent or another trusted adult or older sibling. Getting movement, praying, eating plenty of protein, distracting yourself by doing something else positive, journaling, etc. So, have you fed your brain today? Have you fed your child's brain today? Let's look at this a little more closely. So for adults, what is often recommended for emotional and mental stability and resilience, men should have a minimum of 60 to 80 grams of protein a day. Women should have a minimum of 40 to 60 grams a day. Some nutritionists say that we should eat half of our total body weight in grams, i.e. a 140-pound woman should eat a minimum of 70 grams of protein per day. A 30-pound child should be eating 15 grams of protein a day, maybe 5 grams each meal spread out across the day. and so forth. Blood type seems to matter if you happen to know your blood type. O's seem to do better with animal protein, with, meat. A's and B's seem to do a little better with the lighter chicken, fish, and your plant protein. Children, of course, need less, but it should still be the backbone of the meal and at least 4 times a day. Even our dogs do better when their blood sugar is stable. So, what are some healthy protein sources? Well, we can see here eggs and beans and cheese and fish and meat. So a portion of meat or fish the size of your palm is about 3 ounces or 20 grams. Think a 3 ounce hamburger patty. One egg is approximately 7 grams. So if we want 20 grams, that would be 3 eggs. I just had a 3 egg scrambled eggs for lunch with some fresh veggies. It was lovely. Milk and milk products such as yogurt or cheese. Half a cup of cottage cheese is actually about 20 grams of protein. 8 ounces of good quality Greek yogurt without sugar is 23 grams. So you can do the math. And then, of course, there's your vegetable sources of protein, your plant-based proteins, your nuts, your nut butters, your seeds, your beans, some of your grains, such as quinoa. You have to eat more of them to get the same amount of protein, but they are, of course, a really good source. So we've mentioned amino acids. What are they and why do we love them? So they are the molecules that form the building block of the human body. Essential amino acids are found in food and clump together to form protein. So when we eat the protein and digest it, it breaks down into these component amino acids that go everywhere throughout the body, doing all sorts of things. They make our muscle, they make our skin, they make our blood cells, they make our enzymes, they even make our DNA. And some left over get through the blood-brain barrier and make our neurotransmitters. Now, our bodies is most concerned with staying alive and secondarily with reproducing. So if protein is limited, it's going to be more interested in keeping the heart beating and the skin intact and making babies than it is keeping us happy and emotionally balanced. So this is why getting enough in your diet really matters. Now, apart from food, one way to get these amino acids is over the counter in purified free form amino acids. And it's been shown that if you take one of these amino acids, maybe mix it in a little bit of water and swish it around your mouth, it will absorb within 1 to 20 minutes and turn off symptoms of neurotransmitter depletion. Perhaps give you some energy or help you sleep better or turn off cravings, even for sugar, calm us down, stop a panic attack. And good quality free-form amino acids can be found from any vitamin store or online. And best of all, they are anti-addictive and have been used for children as young as the age of 2. So yes, they're safe for your children. Why add fruits and veggies to our protein consumption? Now, there's some people who do beautifully on a carnivore diet, but most of us need a very well-rounded diet that includes fruits, veggies, and whole grains. Vegetables and fruits provide crucial vitamin and mineral cofactors to make these neurotransmitters. The colorful phytonutrients that turn, the bell pepper I ate today bright red or green or purple or yellow, protect our eyes, are antioxidant and protect against cancer, but also detoxify us. And a high toxic load in our body makes us depressed and anxious and just feel yucky. Fiber feeds the good bacteria that support a healthy mood. Fiber also removes toxins from our body. and that protects the liver, reduces brain fog, and even helps prevent colon cancer. The brain cannot function without vitamins and minerals. So, what are we looking at? 2 to 4 servings of fruits a day, maybe 3 to 6 servings of vegetables, but a serving is only half a cup of fruits or veggies or 1 cup of leafy greens. And again, of course, you squish this down, the younger your child is. And then we need to increase the good fats in our diet. Some cholesterol, like butter or animal fat. Increase the sources of omega-3s, such as egg yolks, what's found in wild game and walnuts and cold water fish. We want to decrease the vegetable oils, such as peanut, soy, and corn oil. But olive oil is actually very good for us. Some saturated fat, like butter or coconut oil, is good, but no trans fats, no hydrogenated oil. They're actually connecting a diet high in seed oils now with young people dying of colon cancer. And there has been lots of research that shows that people who live on ultra processed foods or ultra highly processed foods that have lots of food additives like food dye and preservatives and other chemicals in it and are very do not have many nutrients have been correlated with mental health issues in children, adolescents, and adults. The science is in, and we need to be paying attention to it. I don't know if any of you have heard of this acronym HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. It was actually sort of discovered, created in a addiction hospital in London in the late 1940s that found that when people got into these situations, they were actually more likely to relapse back into heavy alcohol use. But we find that these situations can also create a lot of emotional distress for us. And hunger actually can create angry, tired, and even lonely. So, how do we prevent hungry, angry, lonely, and tired using food? Well, there's a medical disorder called reactive hypoglycemia that's rampant in the American population, runs through families where addiction and mental health issues happen. It's commonly underdiagnosed and not believed in because it's not tested for. But it's a direct result of what we call the standard American diet, the SAD diet, which is high in nutrient deficient, ultra processed foods. It seems to be a primary trigger for mood instability, poor decision making, and even addictive cravings in children, teenagers, and adults throughout the life cycle. And in women, it's a major cause of PMS. We all know hangry, don't we? Well, hangry is what happens when we've gone too long without food, or even as a reaction if we've eaten a lot of sugar and blood sugars come up and then blood sugars come down. Well, it turns out that if blood sugar drops way too low, adrenaline kicks in, and adrenaline leads to emotional and behavioral dysregulation. Adrenaline is the driver behind hangry. If you take a look at this study, you'll notice that people have different mechanisms, different levels of blood sugar control, from normal to very, very poor. So these people were fasted overnight, given a sugary drink first thing in the morning, and then their blood sugar was tested throughout the day. You notice they start out at different places. The red line on top is diabetes. The purple line in the bottom are very, very ill people. The pale green line in the middle, this is where we want to be. Your body can process sugar sometimes, can go without food for long periods of time. If you eat, blood sugar rises gently. The pancreas secretes insulin, which grabs a hold of the sugar molecule, goes to the nearest cell and says, "Hi, I am insulin. I've got some sugar for you. Do you want it? And the healthy muscle cell says, yes, thank you so much. You're a good friend. Let me take sugar from you. And it stores it or uses it. And insulin goes away and blood sugar drops down to baseline. Where we get into trouble is if we have reactive hypoglycemia. And children as young as 4 and 5 can show symptoms of this. So within half an hour of eating sugar, blood sugar rises up to pre-diabetic levels. The brain says, oh no, blood sugar way too high, do something. And now the pancreas secretes too much insulin. Blood sugar drops very quickly down to very low, dangerously low. And the brain says, oh no, way too low, do something. And now adrenaline kicks in, releases adrenaline. Blood sugar goes, and adrenaline releases stored sugar back into the bloodstream. And blood sugar levels go back up to normal baseline. So you see with that bright green line where it drops and then starts rising again, this person didn't cheat or sneak in a little bit of candy. This is what the body does itself to protect itself. However, many of us are very sensitive to adrenaline. But let's look at what happens when we have hypoglycemia. Well, when blood sugar first drops to very, very low, we can have depression all the way to suicide. We can have fatigue. We can have confusion all the way to psychosis. We can be irritable and reactive all the way to violence. We can have trouble sleeping or wake up in the middle of the night wide awake and can't get back to sleep again because blood sugars dropped too low and adrenaline's kicked in. We can have anxiety all the way to panic, and we can have the desire to drink or use. And please notice that these symptoms are the same as found in people with post-acute withdrawal, which used to be known as dry drunk, PMS, and PMDD. Adrenaline is the culprit. What does adrenaline do in our brains and in our bodies? Well, first of all, it destabilizes us. It makes us feel anxious, agitated, impulsive, teary, shaky, angry. It's actually one of the indications that we may have a hungry brain, even if we don't necessarily feel hungry in our tummy. And this is one of the skills that we want to be teaching our children, to distinguish between a hungry tummy, which we can train ourselves out of actually, and a hungry brain, which leads to these symptoms. And so this act of destabilization in people in recovery from addictive disorders can actually create a craving for our behaviors, whether they be reaching for sugar or reaching for alcohol or isolating or doing self-harm such as cutting and burning, but also reaching for drugs, alcohol, pornography perhaps, gambling, tanning beds, anything that can mood alter, fire our neurotransmitters, and help us feel more stable. But even more importantly, it shuts down the part of the brain where we access our resiliency skills, the ones we looked at earlier, where we remember to pray, pause, breathe. So what happens? In the moment of adrenaline from low blood sugar, we maybe get triggered. We forget to pause, breathe, pray, be curious. We forget to care about our promises, think about consequences, protect ourselves and our children. We lose the ability to access our willpower and ask for help. This is where we may melt down, where our children may melt down, where there's more opportunity for tantrums, for violence, for losing our temper. So think back to the last time you or your child got anxious, agitated, had a meltdown, got really angry, and ask yourself, when was the last time we had protein? When was the last time we put real food into our brain and body? Was it more than 3 or 4 hours? Try eating. Try feeding your children. Try feeding your partner and see what changes. So, what do we do to keep blood sugar very stable during the day? Well, we want to be eating protein and complex carbs, the amount that is appropriate for our age and body weight, every 3 to 4 hours to reduce cravings and feel stable and energized. We want to include fiber and healthy fats to slow down the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. Avoid candy and junk food, except as a special treat. And if you happen to be premenstrual or you have a teenage daughter who is, make sure that you eat protein every 3 hours as opposed to every 4 hours. And then be aware that sugar is addictive. Parents and teachers often use sugary treats as a reward or a calmer, thus setting up adults and teenagers to reach for sugar when dysregulated or want a reward. Many people who struggle with mood imbalances may use sugar as a temporary solution. But of course, if you remember, what goes up has to come down, and then adrenaline kicks in. So this may actually underlie many mental health challenges, blood sugar dysregulation, major neurotransmitter depletion, and perpetuates the starving brain process. And so this then commonly leads to mood swings, reactive behaviors, difficulty in school, a lack of serenity, fatigue, and even more food and substance cravings. Sugar can even be a gateway drug and has been described that way in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So again, the solution is to be eating protein every 3 to 4 hours, feeding your children protein from breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, and maybe a bedtime snack every 3 to 4 hours. Begin to work with a nutritional health coach to rebuild your neurotransmitters or to get help in figuring out how to do this for your family. And this also reduces cravings for sugar and other addictive substances and behaviors. So let's bring this home to what actually happens in a family. What are your triggers for stress? In the mornings, could it be getting the family up, dressed, and fed on time? After school, could it be managing homework, after school activities or athletics, preparing supper perhaps, or eating dinner? Maybe you're exhausted and you're stressed and it just feels like too much. What about prepping for the next day and getting your kids organized and to bed? What about children bickering and fighting? Does that trigger you perhaps? Or if they don't listen or they don't obey you? We all have our own triggers. We all have our own high stress situations, but we have to have a well-fed brain so that we can manage these stressful times with grace and with utilizing our internal and our external resources. But what about our children? What are their stress triggers? Getting up and ready in the morning, going to school, sitting still and paying attention, the playground, other social situations, tests, homework, chores, getting to bed at night. Again, each child may have their own different trigger, their own different stressful situation that they just have a really hard time coping with for whatever reason. And so children also need to have a well-fed brain so that they can manage these stressful times with grace and access their internal and external resources. Finally, what if nothing seems to work? What if you're feeding your children well and on time? Maybe you've gotten some coaching or psychotherapy or play therapy for your children, and everybody is still struggling. Well, the conventional approach is to take your child to the pediatrician or doctor, and the only tool they can give you is referral to a psychiatrist or prescription for medication. They do not talk about what the brain needs to function optimally. They do not look for root causes or underlying issues. But this is where functional medicine or functional nutrition comes in. It looks for root causes and looks at what the body needs and the brain needs and the person needs to function beautifully. So the functional nutrition approach is to optimize diet, assess for and remove offending foods, whether these be food sensitivities, things like oxalates or food coloring or gluten intolerance even, using supplements to support neurotransmitter functions such as amino acids and fish oil. We have amino acids to take away test anxiety, to help kids calm down and sleep at night, or actually energize and wake up in the morning if their brains need this extra little bit of support. But sometimes our children's brains and our brains need more support. Maybe there's more going on. Maybe there's environmental toxins such as mold, or one day your child was a beautifully well-behaved child, and the next day they have OCD and depression and anxiety. This could be due to something called PANS or PANDAS, which is a systemic response after a viral illness or a bacterial illness, such as stress. You may have to do lab testing to assess for genetic issues. And I have story after story of this. There may be hormonal imbalances going on. Bottom line, get support, get information, and do the testing you need to do. There are many books in the reference section that can give you direction in these areas. And you can also hire a recovery nutrition coach or other functional nutritionists to help you find your way through this particular labyrinth. We are here to bring awareness and to educate and empower you to live your best life and to help your children live their best lives. So the resiliency approach is to feed your family's brain. This improves decision-making, models self-care, and provides experiential learning. A well-fed brain leads to a happy brain, leads to a person who can make good use of resiliency skills and therefore create a more solid and stable family and life. Be well.